So now moving along, we're really excited to get going now, and I'm going to have SteveNeugebauer come up, and you can see his bio there. But I've listened to his presentation before, and this is really a lot of information. I really encourage you to write notes and to form your questions so that you can get your answers that you have. So without anything else, thank you.
Thanks, yeah, my name is SteveNeugebauer. I'm a licensed hydrogeologist, engineering geologist, and been doing this for about 30 years. Worked in every state in the United States except for 4. Worked in throughout Canada except for 2 provinces. Every Mexican state except for 2. Worked in the Middle East. Worked in Asia, and all that includes the types of studies that you do here. And one of the issues I noted when I first really got established up here in about 2006, when I first got called in to start looking at the critical areas issues, and I saw what the problems were, and I'm just going, why are they doing this to people? These things are wrong, and the science they're using is wrong. They're identifying things that are incorrect. And we found out that they weren't using the science that they should be using. So then I also started looking at the different codes, and the different codes that they were looking at were not correctly being interpreted necessarily. And so I decided to put on these type of workshops, and actually the first workshop I ever put on, I had him. And so he's now a member of SNR Company. But that was 3 years later, 3 years later. So you're going to see the updated and newest version of what we do. And what it's going to do is it's going to take you on a journey through not just your Shoreline Master Program, through the Shoreline Management Act. It's going to take you through kind of a regulatory journey to where this stuff is, because your county actually did choose the plan from the Growth Management Act, and so you actually, that's why you have a comprehensive plan. You had the opportunity to say no at that time, but you chose to do it, so now you're into the program. And so that's why we do discuss the Growth Management Act to some extent, because you are covered by it. You're working on your new comprehensive plan. It also includes the critical areas that now has shifted over to your Shoreline Master Program also. And that's important because those are really what impact the property the most. And that's why we really get into the critical areas. But we get into the regulations first, then we get into the science next. And that's why Paul gets in after the regulations, because that's where the law part comes in. Law and regulations are somewhat similar, but he actually does the law stuff. And then again, the word TMDL, a lot of people are going, what does that mean? That means total maximum daily load. And it's a specification. Ed's going to talk about that, so I'm not going to get into it too much, but I just want to let you know. It has to do with water quality, and it pertains to the Clean Water Act, in the section of the Clean Water Act called Section 403B. And it has to do with impaired waterways. And the Pondere River does have some sections that are what are considered to be Section 403B water. And but surprisingly, in some cases, it's for completely the different reason you think it would be. In some cases, because you have too much dissolved oxygen. And usually dissolved oxygen is good, because it makes your streams and rivers be what we call oligotrophic. It means they're really healthy. At the same time, they go, oh, the bubbles will, cause the fish to have problems in their gills. Well, that depends. The fish usually try to avoid those areas, so they're not, they're still around now. And if you have cascades, waterfalls, everything else, they're around here, and they don't seem to have any major problems. And the same thing we run into the Puget Lowlands. They go, oh, these salmon, they have to have every stream, every river, everything else like that. And the Puget Sound area is absolutely essential for them. And then we go, well, do you guys know we did have a continental glacier here? And it was here from about 18,000 years ago to about 10,000 years ago. And for about 5,000 years of that time, there was about 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers of ice sitting where the Puget Sound is right now. It was completely cut off from the Pacific Ocean. And guess what? We still have salmon, we still have orcas, and they couldn't get in there for 5,000 years. So it's not exactly as critical as habitat as they say it is. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to go through and the regulations first. like we say, there's a lot to cover here. This course was actually originally designed for the Master Builders Association University it was actually continuing education in this course for planners, for architects and engineers, all these other professionals who have to keep taking CEUs, continuing education units, to keep their certifications. And I whittled it down big time to a course that's 4 hours, and then this was actually about 6, but we can play with it. This can be very flexible. And that's one of the things we put up here. There's a lot to cover. You're welcome to ask questions if you want. It's just, in the way we structured it, if we start running out of time, you're just going to miss some case histories, and that's about what you're going to miss. So it's not going to be, the essential stuff's up front. Okay, so what are the next one here? The critical areas, shoreline master programs, and other codes and regulations. These are they derive from what's called the RCW, Revised Code of Washington, which is your laws in the state. Those laws are made by your legislature, and that's what the governor signs, and that's what becomes the foundation. The WACs, on the other hand, are the rules that are created by the agencies who are empowered to administer these laws. And so when you see a WAC, that is actually the rules, like ecology or the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, you have created to enforce or to tell you how to comply with these laws. So what we're going to be doing here is we are going to be getting into the Growth Management Act, the Shoreline Management Act, which are both part of the RCW. We'll also be getting into the critical areas. Now, the critical areas are actually, under the Growth Management Act, they're municipal codes. Under the Growth Management Act, your municipality is completely in charge of the critical areas. Under the Shoreline Management Act, for the Shoreline Master Program, that's a little different story, and we'll be talking about that. Again, the other issue we get into is stormwater. And the reason we talk about stormwater is because of the years that I've been doing this work, the most commonly misinterpreted critical areas are actually stormwater facilities. They're either agricultural drainage ditches, irrigation systems, municipal stormwater systems. These things we see all the time interpreted as being wetlands, streams, all of this. And that's why we're going to show you what the science is and why these really aren't what they say they are. Okay, we're going to get into critical area science and case studies. What is best available science? Now, the interesting thing is the Growth Management Act, which you have adopted into your program with your comprehensive plan, requires what's called best available science. However, the Shoreline Management Act doesn't. This doesn't mean it doesn't require that the best science be used. They just don't use this. There are other differences that we'll discuss shortly. And we'll discuss how stormwater affects you, and we'll discuss some parts of your sensitive areas ordinance and also your Shoreline Master Program. Okay. These are some of the first regulations that came out. One of the ones that's giving you the biggest problem that you see, and you hear the words Clean Water Act. Clean Water Act actually is a succession of federal laws that came along and the Congress passed. The first one of them, up here, was the Federal Water Pollution Control Amendments in 1972. And that one's the one you can thank for wetlands being regulated as they are. Because in that case, the Congress brought wetlands into being classified as waters of the United States. And when they did that, that dropped it under the Corps of Engineers program, and that's why you see the Corps enforcing these wetland programs. And so, the interesting part, which we'll discuss later, is technically wetlands are actually groundwater. And so, they kind of got a little bit wrong, but that's what they chose to do. And there's other issues with it too, because in reality, the way they set up wetlands is they are what we call, quote unquote, receiving waters, which is fine, but at the same time, they're supposed to treat pollutants. And Receiving waters are not supposed to treat pollutants. You're supposed to treat the pollutants before you put them in the receiving waters. So they've got a regulatory problem, and so we'll be talking about. Not only that, groundwater is regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act also, and they haven't addressed that yet. So there's some interesting issues out there. Again, the Clean Water Act was amended in 1987. That's a critical thing for a lot of larger municipalities. It's not such a big deal here yet. But the reason was is it made stormwater a separately regulated pollutant source. And so that became what they call a point source. Anything that's a point source is considered to be polluted, regardless of whether it is or not, because it can be polluted. And that's the way it's worded in the Clean Water Act. And so that's a very important thing to know about, because private property owners don't have point sources. Farmers don't have point sources. They're specifically exempted from the Clean Water Act from having point sources in their agricultural drainage ditches, even their routine turn flows. So just so you know that. So that is what they use, though. This type of pollution is the big issue that they're, when you hear your TMDLs and all that stuff like that, that's what they're referring to. The 1987 amendments made stormwater a separate pollutant in its own right. Originally, it was what we called combined sewer systems, which was stormwater and sanitary sewer. Now it's just stormwater. And it means, it includes dirt, cellular dirt, they say, which means sediments. And so even when you see a river out there running brown, you know, and if you're running the local paper mill, your water going into the river shouldn't be brown, even though they're polluting. You know, it's more polluted than what you're putting into it. So you don't have any permits in your county yet, but it doesn't mean, and actually that's a bad thing, because the Phase 2 municipal stormwater permit allows your municipality to pollute. And when you don't have that permit, you don't have any permission to pollute. And as we'll show you, if you pollute the river, you're breaking the law. Or any other water body. The reason we get into this is just basically to show you the difference. When you see the term point source, that means it's got a specific definition, and it has, it's not like you'll know it when you see it. It's basically a specific confined flow of water that is collected from an area and diverted to a receiving water. And we'll have the actual definition in here. But the other one, the receiving water, the term receiving water, is equivalent to being waters of the United States or waters of the state. What they do in the permits is they call it receiving water. And so if you look at the Clean Water Act, in reality there's only 3 types of water. There's point source water, there's non-point source water, and there's receiving water. And non-point source water is not regulated under the Clean Water Act. However, our state of Washington has included it as being regulated in the state. The trouble is, the reason they did that was because the state wanted to get the federal grant money. We all know any grant money is something you say, no, we don't want it. But they took it. And what they didn't do is tell anybody how to deal with it, which they were required to do. So they've got it in their code, but they don't have any best management practices. They don't have any sampling methods. They have nothing. They have nothing developed for non-point source flow, but they still regulate it. And nothing along and hit you with a permit requirement, even though they don't have any way to deal with it. Again, laws and regulations. You've got your WACs, and the WACs, like the state codes, we got 1730-20A WAC, we got the 1723A WAC. This is the water quality standards for surface waters of the state of Washington. And that's what I'm talking about that has the non-point source flows in it. And that's where they can get you where the federal code doesn't. And so that's where they come in and try to enforce actions on you as far as your TMDL water quality, even though technically you're exempt under the Clean Water Act. Again, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System is their equivalent of it in the state code. And these are the rules. And again, receiving waters cannot be discharged into point sources, which is kind of interesting because what we see all the time is them saying that this is a stream coming down here and it's flowing into a roadside ditch. You can't bring a receiving water into a point source. That completely changes the chemistry, which you're not allowed to do. It changes the temperature and it pollutes it. And so, but they do it all the time. And they'll say this whole system's a stream, and it isn't. Once you hit a point source, it's sort of like when you mix hazardous waste with non-hazardous material. Once you've done that, everything's hazardous waste. Same thing if you put a stream, which you're not allowed to do anyway, into a point source, the whole system's a point source, and you just lost your stream. So it's something that they do all the time, and they're not allowed to do it. And we see those mistakes everywhere. You don't have a definition for a stream in your code, which is not unusual. I mean, the RCW doesn't have a definition for a stream either. And which is kind of interesting. Although as we'll discuss later, we're trying to put one in. And so it makes it kind of hard. How do they come onto your property and determine what's a stream if they don't even have a definition for one? And so the interesting part is that what people think is a stream may not be a stream. And we'll be explaining the science behind streams so you'll understand why what you may have on your property is not a stream. Again, what we see in there's other big problems when a stream isn't misidentified. Because if they're saying that your drainage ditch is a stream, then next thing you know, not only does it take your property, you can't maintain it. And if you can't maintain it, and you're a farmer, you have drainage problems. So your crops start having problems. But also, then you start getting flooding problems. And so we see that big time in the west side, where we get people continuously flooded, and King County won't do anything about it because they mess the drainage up in that area so badly, and they have all unlined drainage ditches, none of which the county owns. They'll call them all streams. The trouble is that this time of year, they're full of groundwater. And so one thing that's completely, truly impervious is saturated soil. I mean, concrete is less pervious, more permeable than saturated soil. So, just so you know that. This is actually what King County calls Trip 045. They're calling that a stream. That's an old agricultural drainage ditch, and we know it for a fact. So, but you can see how well it's maintained because they're calling it a stream now. They can't clean it out. They can't do anything with it. And so this is one of the areas where we have major flooding occurring. This is in North Auburn area of King County. And we did studies throughout this area. And we spent 3 years of doing stream studies. And all the streams they identified, none of them worked except for one. And the one that they did, we identified was a stream. King County had completely almost obliterated it. So, anyway, just so you know, this is the Green River Valley, and that's what they call a stream. And it isn't. And the hydrology's wrong. As a matter of fact, these are the ones that are full of groundwater during the wintertime because this site's kind of unique. It's on the hard deposits. It's got Osceola mud flow underneath it, and it's got the hard deposits on top of it. It's only got 40 feet above the Osceola mud flow, and it's got the Green River flowing through this stuff too. And so, since 1990, the groundwater has risen 40 feet. So it's now at the surface, and that's because of their mishandling of stormwater and what they've done with the river. And they can keep increasing the levee heights too. The bad thing about increasing levee heights, especially when you've got a stream like the Green River, or river, because rivers are just big streams, is that they're connected to groundwater. So if you build your levee up 20 feet above the bank, guess what? Well, if that stream actually gets up to that height, it's going to come up on the other side of the bank as groundwater. So putting a higher levee doesn't really work very well. Okay. There is a definition in Walla Walla County for a stream, but it's really for a waterway. And this was really done for a regulatory jurisdiction regarding the ordinary high water mark. And we'll get into ordinary high water marks, but just so you know, they're not scientific. They're based on common law. And it was basically to allow trade to occur and to allow people to have access to water rights. Because the waterways were the highways. That was the commerce ways. And you couldn't have people along the river claim they owned that section of it because then nobody could have any commerce. And so they had to set up some way to say, this belongs to the people so we can have commerce. And that's what the ordinary high water mark was developed for. Now they use it for a lot of other reasons. We'll show you something scary in a minute. But anyway, there is no truly scientific definition for a stream anywhere, and none of them, and the science for streams is called fluvial geomorphology. That's one of the primary sciences, although we do also do hydrology, hydrogeology, all of these other sciences, sedimentology, because stream flow is very complex in order to figure out what it is. And they don't use that. It's basically policy type things. This is the one that we had some issues with in King County, where all of this was identified as being wetlands and streams. Every one of that. And this is out of, with the buffers added onto it, this person had nothing. Again, here's other laws and regulations. This is supposed to be a stream. Wetland scientists mapped is going through. This is actually on your way, if you ever go back and forth to Seattle. This is actually right below the Snoqualmie Summit ski resort. Right there, right across from the rest stop where you stop on the main road there. And wetland scientists identified this as being a stream going through there and creating the wetlands. And actually what this is an illegal pond somebody dug. They did the size of it correctly, and it overflows onto the property whenever the stormwater flowed through there. And so what it really was illicit stormwater, and that was the hydrology for the wetland. And this is where that illicit stormwater went to this pond right here. And that's where it normally drained to. And you can see the place where you normally stop on your way back and forth. So this is really interesting. This is from ecology. This is their latest and greatest on what you should do to identify the ordinary high water mark. And what you see is it's a pretty good diagram in a way. It's showing you what the different levels are and all that fun stuff. But what they've got up here is they put the ordinary high water mark way up here. See what that is? Well, here's the bankful flow. The bankful flow only occurs about every 24 months. And so what they've done is they put your ordinary high water mark out into the floodplain, which only occurs maybe once every 3 to 5 years, maybe. And the interesting part is it's supposed to be something that's frequent, immediate, that occurs all the time, and it's ordinary. So that's how they take your land. Right there, if you're in a flat floodplain, that could take hundreds of acres, thousands of acres of your property by misplacing that ordinary high water mark. Because that's where they start your setbacks from, is the ordinary high water mark. And if they start with it way out there to begin with, you're in deep trouble. I mean, I actually was doing some ordinary high water mark work on the Skycomish River, and we're accurately marking it, and all of a sudden we see next door neighbor with a mark way up in the trees. And that guy lost half of his property because the guys didn't know what they were doing. And so, and he wanted us to redo it. Like, it's too late, you already entered it in. But, the person who hired us was real happy. Because he almost hired the other people. But anyway, you've got to make sure that the correct ordinary high water mark there, even though it's not scientific, the definition of it is pretty clear. And basically what it says is that the waters are so common and usual and so long continued in all ordinary years as to mark upon the soil character and distinct form of that abutting upland in respect to vegetation. That's not when it gets up into the floodplain. It happens every 3 to 5 years, or even at the bankable width, which happens every 2 years. So you've got to watch out when they start doing these things. And that's ecology's proposed guidance for this. Okay. Again, this is the one that you guys were worried about. This is the Clean Water Act, and this is the section 301, which has to do with discharges of pollutants. And you'll see right here it says, except as it complies with these sections, the discharge of any pollutant by any person shall be unlawful. So that's why I'm saying that even if you don't have a Phase 2 municipal stormwater NPDES permit, your discharges from your municipality, from your facilities, which will already have, like if you have a paper mill, they're going to have a POTW permit already, publicly owned treatment work, is what that stands for. Or not POTW, NPDES permit, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. You don't have an NPDES permit, that's kind of a drawback in a way, because you don't have a fallback as far as going through the process if you have discharges above the limits that are allowed. And so if you have a water quality violation, you're automatically in violation. You could be slammed with it. So anyway. is what it says, is to protect the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's water. And so that, and they took that to be temperature too. So that's some issues, and that's what some of the TMDLs on your river, Conway River, is temperature. So anyway, just so you know, point sources are always considered polluted until they're treated also. So okay. These are some definitions that are great to have, and basically it tells you what is a pollutant. And it means dredged soil, soil solids, incinerator residue, sewage garbage, sewage sludge, munitions, chemical waste, biological material, radioactive material, all this heat, erector, discarded equipment, rock, sand, cellular, dirt, and industrial, municipal, and agricultural waste discharged into water. So that's what pollutants are. That's why sediments are also included in it. And again, point sources right there. Any discernible, defined, and discrete conveyance, including but not limited to any pipe, ditch, channel, tunnel, conduit, well, discrete fissure, virtually everything. And but you can always get the DVDs here or CDs, and this is all in there, so you don't have to take notes if you want to get that. But the interesting part, like I said, notice the last part. This term does not include agricultural stormwater discharge and return flows from irrigated agriculture. They specifically exempted it. That happened in 1977 when it became the Clean Water Act. Because in 1972, when they passed it, the original law, it impacted farmers dramatically. And so they had to come in and make some changes so it wouldn't put agriculture out of business. Okay, and again, the Clean Water Act is what we call a jurisdictional law. And that means because it's a federal law, it can only apply to federally regulated areas. And that's why when you look at it and they've got the significant nexus issue or all these other issues where the court comes out and they go, you're given a non-challengeable jurisdictional determination. That means they've determined that your waterway, that your wetland or your stream or whatever is regulated by them under the federal code, under the Clean Water Act. And that's what they mean by jurisdictional, and that's what happened in Priest Lake. That's what's happening in other places. That's why the EPA and the Corps get involved in these. So if you get one of those little things, you won't be too happy either, because they give you this thing. It's an unchallengeable jurisdictional determination. And it's especially bad when they're wrong. And they usually are. And so that's the problem, is they don't know what they're doing half the time. And we see them. We've got one where a guy gets this jurisdictional determination because it discharged to 10 Mile Creek. Well, 10 Mile Creek's in a whole different drainage basin. If there's no way it could possibly do it. And only that, what they were identifying was stormwater drainage facilities, which were exempt under state law. So, not only that, they're exempt under federal law, too. So, it's, anyway, this is the federal codes, USC. That's the equivalent of their laws. Their rules are in the 33 CFR. And any Code of Federal Regulations. CFR stands for Code of Regulations, and those are the federal rules. And that's what we refer to when we're dealing with the Corps or the EPA or anybody else. And if the EPA or Corps come in and take jurisdiction, ecology is pretty much out of it. The only section that ecology deals with, Section 401 and some sections of the permitting, which is Section 402. So everything else is done by the Corps and the EPA pretty much. And those, Section 402 is the permitting section of the Clean Water Act. That's if you did have a municipal stormwater and PDS permit. Or if you work for like the paper manufacturers up here or something like that who have an NPDES permit, that's under Section 402 of the Clean Water Act. Again, this gets into the different types of fines. Ecology can fine you and impose, but the US EPA can do much worse. But ecology will always send you, if you see this little love note come to you from ecology, but that's their standard form. They send it out all the time. We get people calling us up every day. You're going to get these little letters saying you're going to get $10,000 fine. But it's a form letter. So if you run into that, talk to somebody like Paul, and they can help you with it. But anyway, EPA can impose fines up to $37,500 a day, and apparently, according to the EPA in the Priest Lake case, they can actually go up to twice that much. And the Supreme Court justices seemed a little bit surprised at that. But anyway, that's what they think they can do. But you guys can get back at them in a way, because you can actually file citizens lawsuits under the Clean Water Act. And we've actually done some cases where we've actually gone after municipalities who are violating the Clean Water Act and at the same time violating your property rights. And you have a right to file a citizen's lawsuit if they're violating their permit. So, or any provision of the Clean Water Act. And they can give you $37,500 a day in fines for each violation. And we typically find at least 10. So. Again, this is a list of the fines, and it's in our book, so you can actually see it. You won't be able to see it here, but on the DVDs or CDs. Endangered Species Act. This is another one you're pretty much familiar with up here. It's what your United States Fish and Wildlife Service like to deal with, because you don't have direct connection to the shoreline, so you don't have to deal with National Marine Fisheries Service, which is the other agency under the NOAA who administer the Endangered Species Act. But we do have some equivalents in our state, which has species of local significance and species of importance and other types of species that they have determined that they do not want to be impacted. But the biggest factor on this one is that what they look for are takings, potential takings. And where we see the biggest problem with takings is actually when they mistakenly call drainage ditches and stormwater conveyances streams. Because they call a ephemeral drainage ditch a stream. Because these places are dangerous and lethal for these fish. And they want to encourage them to come into them. And if they do that, they could be in violation of the Endangered Species Act. And again, you can file a citizen's lawsuit under that too. So, and if they're doing that, and we come along and say it's not a stream, and they're busily getting fish into it, you can go after them. And so, they need to be more careful what they call fish-bearing streams, because if they actually are risking and taking, an unauthorized taking, that's huge fines again. They're right up there at $37,500 a day of fine, but also they're criminal.
I think they're criminal anyway.
Yeah, and again, it's federal. So, I mean, and that's the beautiful part of a citizen's lawsuit. Is citizen lawsuits don't go to the hearing examiner. They don't go to your local superior court. They go directly to the federal court. And so it's really a different world out there. And it makes it very difficult for those who aren't familiar with that world. And especially, most municipalities are not very familiar with the federal codes. And so, nor are there county, some have sophisticated attorneys who are really good, some don't. And then they have to bring outside, like when we did one in Olympia had to bring outside firm and specialize in this area. So, anyway, this is just a little thing what some people think about, different views, but regardless, I can say that most people I've met doing this, all of them don't want to hurt the species out there. They don't want to destroy it. They're not going to pollute the water. They're not going to go out there and try to harm them. I mean, you live here. It's your backyard. You want to keep it going. So you're not going to hurt these species. And the problem is they have a different idea of what will hurt them than most people do. Sort of like the salmon. They go, we need every single stream cleared out of here, including the ones that aren't streams. And so they end up bringing them in there and they die. So they get stranded. All these problems occur. Shoreline Management Act, your favorite one. This one, yeah, it went into effect in 1971, and it is under the RCW. And it wasn't too bad at first, because it was more to make sure that development didn't conflict with your neighbors, so that you didn't obstruct your neighbor's view, and that you had everybody utilize the shoreline in a civil and nice way. It wasn't really designed around, let's protect all the species of the world and have these setbacks and doing all these things. Yeah, there was an upland area of 200 feet, that's where it covered. It covers 200 feet from the ordinary high water mark onto up to wherever that ends. And unfortunately, they put the ordinary high water mark 5 feet higher than it should be, and it probably covers your entire property. But, so you want to make sure that's right. But again, It does sometimes include some or all the 100-year floodplain. The 100-year floodplain is really the 1% floodplain. It's also, if you look at your FEMA maps that they have up here, which are very inaccurate usually, but that's what they call the base flood elevation. So that's synonymous with that. And again, it's in order for it to be a stream, it has to be greater than 20 cubic feet per second. Well, actually, in order to be regulated in this act, it has to be greater than 20 cubic feet per second to be regulated in the Shoreline Management Act. And that's mean annual flow. Again, lakes, 20 acres and greater, and so if you got some larger lakes up here, so they're going to be regulated. Ponds are regulated under your critical areas ordinance, and so are smaller streams. That's what we're going to get into. Shoreline and Growth Management Act critical areas. Until 2010, there was a difference because the Shoreline Management Act did not have critical areas ordinance in it. Before that, it was only your Growth Management Act critical areas that had critical area requirements. The problem was that there was some confusion as to what the Growth Management Act covers and what Shoreline Management Act covers. And so municipalities were overlapping them, and they started regulating the shorelines under the Growth Management Act also. So they were regulating under both laws. And in 2003, the legislature saw there was a problem, so they made a change to the legislature to clarify, they thought, to say that shorelines are only regulated by the Shoreline Management Act. Everything else is regulated by the Growth Management Act, especially if you choose to plant. And so that kind of threw a big wrench in the monkey works because all these municipalities are going now. And they didn't really think about it, but the wrench was there, and especially when a legal challenge hit. And the Growth Management Hearing Boards had to hear it. They go, well, the legislature said in 2003 that shorelines are regulated only by the Shoreline Management Act, and so you can't regulate under your growth management critical areas. And that's where a lot of interesting things happen. And Paul may talk about that, he may not. But anyway, that's what eventually resulted in you getting critical areas in the Shoreline Management Act and the Shoreline Master Programs. And the weird thing about Shoreline Master Programs is they are completely controlled by ecology, but your critical areas ordinances under your Growth Management Act aren't. Those are exclusively your municipal entity. You can do those with your municipality. They're completely authorized. That's who administers it. Ecology doesn't administer it at all. But the Shoreline Master Program they do, and the other factor is it's almost like it's not a municipal code. Even though you have to adopt it, it's like it's a state code that you're adopting. And it's sort of coming from a court decision that Paul might discuss with you about where the state Supreme Court overruled Whatcom County's a court case against Whatcom County's Shoreline Management Act because the counties can't impose certain taxes, but the state can. And so they equated it down as to the state being the law, the SMP being a state law rather than being your municipal code. But Paul may get into that. Again, the shoreline. This is what happened. It was the Shoreline Management Act, future-wise versus the Growth Management Act hearing boards. And they were only regulated by the SMA. The legislature, what it led to is the state Supreme Court said, that's right, the Growth Management Hearing Board is correct. It's only shorelines regulated by Shoreline Management Act, everything else by the Growth Management Act. Threw everything into turmoil. Ecology, all the other groups tried to get a clarification from the state court, but the court said we already gave you a chance, you ignored it, so this is where we're at. So they passed the legislative bill EHB 1653, which basically changed the Shoreline Management Act to now have critical areas.
So shoreline management does work critical areas.
Yes, the Shoreline Management Act does have critical areas ordinance in it, and that's why you see critical areas. It didn't used to have that in it, but they wanted to have the equivalent of the Growth Management Act critical areas, and so when they found out they couldn't do it because of what the legislature did, not only did they, in 2010, bring critical areas into the Shoreline Management Act, they also made it retroactive to 2003. So the counties wouldn't be violating the law who were overlapping all that time. So they made it a retroactive code too. I think there's some legal problems with that too, and I don't know, but I'm not an attorney. So all I can tell you is that there's a big difference though. In the Growth Management Act, the critical areas are more focused on damages to any type of damage that you do to the environment, basically. Whereas in the Shoreline Management Act, they go, it's no net loss of existing habitat functions, which is our legislature's way of, again, confusing people and making lawyers rich. So what they do is they create something that nobody really knows what it means. And so it's a complete dubious thing. I mean, what is existing habitat functions? Well, how do you put a finger on what a habitat function is? What science tells you what this is? So it's like, you know, saying, what does a cloud look like? I mean, yeah, it looks different all the time. I mean, so you can't, it's really a dubious thing that they've then created a nightmare for people in the Shoreline Management Act, just like they did when they made it 2000, when they did their little change in 2003. And the court gave them a chance to change it, but they didn't. Maybe someday this will get challenged. I don't know. But, again, like I said, the Growth Management Act does require best available science. The Shoreline Management Act doesn't. But again, it doesn't say that they mean that they aren't required to use good science and the latest and supported peer-reviewed science. And again, ecology does have ecology has no direct authority over the GMA programs, but they do over water quality and NPDS, and they do over Shoreline Master programs. Shoreline Master programs, as far as we know, there's no county in the state of Washington that isn't required to develop one. Because every municipality has shorelines in it, has to have it. You do have shorelines here in Conway County, and so you will have one. And you're one of the first counties to actually be facing this, just so you know. There are others down the road waiting to see what happens to you, although Whatcom County's already gone through theirs, and a few others are a little bit ahead of you. You're up there towards the front. And so, I mean, again, you got to cut your municipality a little bit of slack, because this isn't like it's something that's been around for a long time and that they should know all this stuff. A lot of this is kind of unexplored territory. So, I mean, it's something that's just like this organization's kind of young and it's just now here and you're moving ahead. Well, the same thing sort of like with this program. I mean, the law only went into effect in 2010. So it's a process that's kind of moving along, and we'll see what happens. But, you know, hopefully they'll want to work with you and try to figure out how to make this work so it works for everybody. But again, you do have different requirements in your shoreline master programs, and one of the things that you have is your critical area. So one of the things that they do is they want to look at streams, because streams are considered to be fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. If they happen to be run into your shoreline area, they're going to be there and they're going to be regulated too. But also you do have your Growth Management Act. You did adopt it. You brought it on board. And so technically your critical areas for that too. But what they use is kind of interesting, is the state legislature goes, use WAC 222-16030, but that doesn't even have a definition for a stream. And second of all, it doesn't have best available science either. And it assumes something's a stream. So that's why you have problems a lot of times with people coming along and saying, well, your creek, this is a creek. And by the way, creeks are the same thing technically as streams. It's a local colloquialism that's not unusual in the United States. But we try to figure out where its origins were. Somewhere. Some say Australia. Who knows? But anyway, if it's a real stream, then you could type it. But the trouble is making sure it really is one is really important to you. Because first of all, streams have rivers almost identical to what your river has. And so you want to make sure that they're classified correctly, not only for that reason, but also so that you don't end up having to get total PMDL issues, which technically private individuals shouldn't have to deal with. But I don't know what they're doing up here. Secondly, is because those drainage ditches were put there for a reason. If they weren't needed, I'm certainly they wouldn't go dig ditches and put them in if they weren't needed. And so they were put there so your farmland would drain, so you didn't flood, all those other issues. So if it becomes a stream, you lost that drainage, and so you're going to have problems. Again, streams are fluvial systems. Fluvial, that's why when I get asked, what does fluvial mean? Fluvial means stream, river. That's what it's basically the definition for. And the science for studying it is fluvial geomorphology. The habitat for the streams is called a riparian system, rivers and streams. And so, yeah, once you're sure it's a stream or a river, well, rivers should be pretty obvious, but streams aren't. And then you can actually apply WAC 2216030 if you want to. But anybody can pretty much do that. But finding out if it's a stream or not is important. Yeah, one of the problems we see, unfortunately you don't have it here, but some municipalities refuse to get out of the business of covering regulating shorelines with the Growth Management Act. And we see it all the time. And one of them is King County has created their aquatic areas critical area, which just so happens to be exactly the same as a shoreline regulation. So they double dip you, and since they get paid, they're self-supporting agency that charges out $144.25 an hour. This is how they make their money. But that's nothing. Thurston County charges $165 an hour for their staff. So, but anyway, just so you know, there is no RCW or federal law that defines what a stream is. And so here they're regulating a stream, and nobody knows what it really is. Nor does your county define what it is. At least not in your development code, which is where it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be in your critical areas ordinance or in your shoreline master program. And that's another issue we find here, which is kind of interesting. Your municipal code is not made available to you online. Your county code is not out there. And even the places where we normally get it from, like the MRCS, it's not there either. And one of the things, yes?
Our county development regulations are on the county's website.
Yeah, the development regulations, but not the entire county code.
That's, oh well, all of the development regulations for natural resource issues are all in one document.
Right.
The other things like dog laws, and they're not all in.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the things that, you know, it's nice to be able to have out there so that they can see, so that they know what they're doing right or wrong.
Sure.
So, I mean, it would be really convenient if you guys made it available to MRCS and put it out there for your citizens to go look at. Because, you know, you want to know what your codes are, because how do you know if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing if you can't look them up? Yeah.
Sterling Codifiers lets us put ours online for $500 a year.
Yeah. And so I'm just saying it's something that you as citizens might like to look at every once in a while and see what you're really allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, what the county expects you to do, such as things like what your planning commission does and how it does it, and why the chair of your planning commission can't vote and accept to break ties, things like that. You might want to look at that in your code to see why that's there. But, you know, it's just something as a side, because we usually get curious when we start looking at codes and we can't find them. Yeah, but your municipal code is out there, and you did a good job with that. So we're not criticizing that at all. We're just saying it's nice for them to see all the codes. But no, that's how we know what we've talking about here is because we've looked at it.
Okay. The planning commission bylaws are in that document too, just if you want.
Okay. Are they in here?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, we've never seen it in the development code, but that's fine. Great. Okay. Again, the issue is there is a definition in the WAC, but this is again rules, and this is under the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and it was originally, and it still is, watercourse, but they added and/or stream because S&R company's been griping about this for a long time. And again, it says that means any portion of a channel, bed, bank, or bed at bottom of a waterway of the ordinary high water line, all waters of the United States. but it doesn't get into what it really is hydrologically, what is fluvial geomorphology. How do you identify what it is? It's more for determining jurisdiction for waterways. Where's the ordinary high water mark? Where does the state take over, the municipality take over, and where do you own your property? And again, one of the things it says it doesn't do, which we see all the time, is it doesn't include irrigation ditches, canals, stormwater runoff devices, or other entirely artificial water courses, except where they exist in a natural water course that has been altered by humans. Well, how the hell do you know that? You know, so they come out and what did they bring, a Ouija board or something like that? I mean, because in order to identify a stream, you've got to do fluvial geomorphologic studies, you've got to do hydrologic studies, you've got to do groundwater studies, you've got to do all these studies to find out if it really is there, if it really was there, or if it's really there now. And, I mean, just because, I mean, we see people all the time say this is a stream, and it isn't. And it's because they didn't study it. When the old surveyors were out there, all they did was, if they saw water in it, it was a stream. If it wasn't water in it, it was a wash. So that's the problem. And so the reality is it already says if it's man-made, if it's a ditch on your property, if it's anything else, it's not a stream. But you look and see, and you'll find that they've got these mapped as streams. And I'm not saying your municipality does. I'm saying WDFW, the Department of Ecology. If you look at the stream stats pages or the Salmonscape pages, you'll see a lot of these things mapped as streams. Again, we want to get a definition to of a stream that is scientific into the RCW, and that'll self-correct the wax. Because if you have that definition in the RCW, they can't have something different than the wax. Again, it's scientifically incorrect. It's inconsistent with a decision that the Supreme Court made in 2006, the United States Supreme Court, regarding what's called the Rapanos decision. And that's actually one you really should be aware of, because that is how the Corps of Engineers determines if you have a jurisdictional wetland or any other waters of the United States on your property. And that's because now they're looking at two sections of it from the Third Circuit Court. But anyway, the original determination is if it creates a significant nexus with waters in the United States. That came from Justice Kennedy. But now they're also using something from Justice Scalia, which basically says it has to have a surface water connection. But regardless, what Rapana says is that Justice Scalia was very succinct about it. He says that ephemeral drainage systems are not jurisdictional. They are not streams. They have to be either seasonal, which is the same as intermittent, or perennial. The only way a stream can be either seasonal or perennial is if it has groundwater-based flow. Because second, you lose, ephemeral means that it's being fed by precipitation only. And that includes snowmelt. Because snowmelt is precipitation. When you get a seasonal stream or perennial stream, it actually has groundwater flowing into it. That's what's called keeping it flowing through the long summer months when all the snow is melted. It's not because it's coming from some magical source. It's groundwater flowing into it. And that's why a seasonal stream will be there until maybe July, maybe August, depending on the season. And then the groundwater table literally drops below the stream bed. It's still there. It's just below the stream bed. So that's why you have to have a groundwater base flow for a stream to exist. And that's why groundwater hydrology, and I happen to be a licensed hydrogeologist, that's what we study. And that's how we make those determinations. The same thing, we look at the fluvial geomorphology, we look at the surface water hydrology, we look at the patterns, we look where the headwaters get their water from, we look at all of that. And we look at the sinuosity, everything that goes with it. And that's how we make those determinations. We don't just go out and say, yeah, fish are in it, so it's a stream. Because those fish shouldn't probably be in there with drainage ditch, because that's a violation of the Endangered Species Act. So you got to make sure what you're doing there. And again, we're hoping to get a real definition in there that actually re-emphasizes what the Clean Water Act says this should be and what it shouldn't be. It's interesting too, because this sort of looks like a river, doesn't it? I mean, this is LiDAR imagery, and it's showing you what's there. But actually, it's a glacial meltwater channel. And there's actually no streams here at all. So that was 9,300 years ago in Whatcom County. But we find that they're identifying lots of these as streams. Glacial meltwater channels all over the place. And they have the fluvial geomorphology of a stream because they were streams 9,300 years ago. And so what we find is they misidentify these as streams all the time, even though it's actually stormwater or drainage ditch water or thermal flows that are in them. And so that's what you end up having identified on your property. And this was a nice big one, but trust me, this whole area is completely vegetated, filled in. There's no streams there. Matter of fact, that's pretty much the same area. You don't see any river there now, do you? So, I mean, that's what it looks like with the vegetation on it. So, and this is what the USGS topographic map of this area shows as far as streams that are in that area. And, you know, there's not too many up there. But even then, these have not been studied. This is just what the USGS thinks are streams. This is what the county thinks are streams. Looks a little different. And you'll notice some interesting things, how they get really kind of straight, follow lines and stuff like that. Streams don't do that. And what a lot of these are agricultural drainage systems, irrigation systems, all of that stuff that they're calling streams. We see it all the time. A lot of them are actually municipal stormwater drainage ditches. And in fact, Whatcom County identifies all of their roadside ditches as being salmon-bearing streams. They've actually got signs there, and they've actually forced farmers out of business because they're saying you're discharging your agricultural runoff, which is actually not a point source, into our roadside ditch, and that's affecting the fish, so you have to get a farm plan. Even though that water in that roadside ditch is polluted because it's a point source. So the farmers are putting their non-point source water into the point source water, which means they aren't doing anything, and they're shutting them down because they're violating, they say you're hurting the fish, when the fish shouldn't be in there in the first place. The county's violating the Endangered Species Act. So it's lots of fun stuff, but we see this every day, and we have to go out and nail them for it. This one's a classic citizen's lawsuit waiting to happen, and they're getting ready to do it. And when they do, Whatcom County is going to get with like 100 violations of the Clean Water Act, and they're going to get hit with violations of the Endangered Species Act. And when you get to that, you're looking at like $30 million a day in fines. Oh, it'll hurt. It'll make the one people in freestyle seem very happy. I mean, the Whatcom County will as much as they owe right now theoretically in one day. So anyway, the Forest Practices Act, it implies a lot up here because you guys have a lot of timberlands. The interesting thing about the Forest Practices Act is that its critical areas, wetlands, everything else are different. They are not regulated the same as your Growth Management Act or your Shoreline Management Act. Forest Practices has their own critical areas, and it's administered by the DNR. And so, matter of fact, they can actually do timber harvesting in wetlands. They can do a lot of things in wetlands that you can't do. And so they're very different. They actually have their own wetlands manual. They have their own regulations and codes for it. So it's a little bit different. Again, it falls into the same category, WAC 22160030. That's the definition, and that's what tells you what a type of stream is. And that's what they oddly use. You'll see them use it for lakes. You use it for shorelines. It was never intended for that. It was designed for streams and rivers only. And so King County, all these people have it being a type F or type S, F, all these types of different streams, exactly what's in here. But they do it for lakes. And they're doing it for marine shorelines, and this does not apply to that. Again, it assumes that all channelized water bodies are streams because they don't have a definition for a stream. And this is where we get into problems. And this is like I was down in Olympia testifying before a House committee yesterday because they want to give wetland scientists the ability to identify streams, even though all they do is look at this and say all we have to do to identify a stream is say whether it's a type F, S, N, NF, or whatever. They don't figure that they have to go figure out if it's a stream first. And that's the problem, and that's why people get stuck with critical areas they shouldn't have. Fish and Wildlife Code, you know this one pretty well too, because it does affect you. The biggest issue with this one is dealing with construction in water. And again, the hydraulic project approvals and JARPAs are the biggest issue you guys really have to watch out for as far as them coming along and giving you problems. Although they will create other problems, but if you do a project that deals with fish-bearing waters, you better make sure that you check that you either need a JARPA or an HPA, because if you don't, these people carry guns and they will arrest you. And so it's better to make sure up front than to find out later and end up getting arrested. Because I'll show you one here where a guy got arrested for actually fixing a stormwater conveyance that they said was a stream. And so all he was doing was what he was supposed to do, is prevent the erosion from occurring to dump sediments in to actually drain to a fish-bearing stream. But, okay, the Growth Management Act, again, this is something you have to be concerned with because you did choose the plan. You are involved, you are in the Growth Management Act program, so you technically do have critical areas. You do, I believe in your code right now, it's called sensitive areas, but eventually it'll be revised, I would assume, that would be critical areas. And it's got similarities to what you're going to see in the Shoreline Master Program, but the other difference is that, again, best available science is technically not required, but it doesn't mean that the best science is not required. Watershed planning, again, this is another issue that these are all codes that affect you, and you probably didn't know there were so many of them, but they're all there. And again, this is where you get to choose what you're going to do in your watershed and all that fun stuff. But the problem is it does end up being one of the ones that identify streams that really aren't streams very often, and end up causing a lot of issues, and it has to do with a lot of weird problems with drainage systems and how they figure out what impacts there are to a watershed and where it's at. So this does include citizen involvement, and you want to get involved with the ones that are in your area. Watershed planning, again, it's basically, it includes groundwater resources. One of the issues that they use this for, and it's really been a major issue here in Eastern Washington, and it's going to get worse and worse, is when Kitty Cass County found out when ecology shut down their entire groundwater basin, known for further withdrawals. Here are all these people with their properties that aren't developed yet, and they have no access to water, and so their property values went to zero. And most of the people in Eastern Washington rely on groundwater. And the problem is ecology doesn't really bother to find out if there's adequate water supplies. All they have to do is demonstrate that they don't know. And if they don't know, what they do is they will shut down the groundwater aquifer to protect existing water rights, holders' rights, and to protect the fish in the rivers and streams. So this has been a big issue, not only here in Eastern Washington. Those in Mason and Jefferson County in Western Washington got hit with the same thing in the Chimacum Creek area, which is called WRIA 17. Others are getting hit with Snohomish County, where they shut down the groundwater. And so next thing you know, if you got property, you don't have development, you don't have your well in already, and if you don't keep that well running, if that well's not continuously run, then you lose your rights in a certain period of time. So you want to make sure that, but at the same time, we believe there's actually quite a bit of water, but nobody's done any studies. Nobody's done any studies over here to find out what water supplies are available. The last studies that were done of any significance were in the 1950s, and they covered a small area. All they do, all their studies do, is try to prove that there is a connection between rivers, groundwater flow and streams, which I've already said. Groundwater base flow is what's required for streams to be present. And so they're going, well, that means if we draw too much water, you're going to affect the stream flow, and they're no longer going to be streams. But they don't know that because they don't know where the groundwater is. They don't know how much is there. So, but they'll shut it down because they don't know.
And get away with it.
Oh, yeah, but well, Kitty Cass County fought them pretty good. And we fought him pretty good too. And we actually made him do a compromise in that area for some extent. Well, we didn't make him do it. We strongly suggested he do it. But anyway, they're exempted certain people. But also there was a recent case that just got through the state Supreme Court that said that ecology cannot control two types of groundwater withdrawals. They can't control groundwater withdrawals for irrigation up to half an acre of land, such as lawns and stuff like that. And they can't control groundwater withdrawals for agricultural watering, for watering livestock. So all you have to do is get a goat, maybe, or plant a lawn. And so anyway, they can't stop you from doing that. And that doesn't even require a health department permit when you put them in for that reason. So just so you know, that's the only unrestricted way that you can put in a groundwater well if you get a closed county. They close the water basin for you. So I'm not advocating you use it for any other reason. I'm just telling you that's the only exemption. Anyway, this is where we start getting into the critical areas in more detail. And what I'm going to do is start with that section next, and I'm going to get turn the next thing over to, I think you're next then, right? Yep. Okay.